You know the drill. Here we are. My name's Casey. Wonderful to see you as always. This is February 10th, the Monday 5:30 mindfulness meditation half hour. Great to see you as always. Yesterday I was in Mountain View. Every Sunday in Mountain View there's a great farmers market. Unfortunately, it ends at 1, and usually I sleep right through it, as was the case yesterday. However, I still went to Mountain View because I love to walk around downtown Castro Street, and the library there is one of my favorites. Cupertino, Los Gatos, and Mountain View, my top three libraries in the Bay Area. And um, so I was walking downtown. One of the cool things about downtown Mountain View, first of all, I was born in Mountain View at El Camino, but there's a bookstore, a bookshop in Mountain View called East West Books. Maybe you've been there before, East West Bookstore. And a lot of Eastern philosophy there, a lot of crystals and singing bowls and books on all kinds of metaphysical, spiritual, yoga, things like that. So very Eastern. Um, and there was a series of books there that I hadn't seen before. The author was Yogananda, and he wrote a book called Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a very influential book. Steve Jobs, whether you like him or not, this is just a fact. At his memorial, he gave every single person a copy of that book, Autobiography of a Yogi. So maybe that makes you want to read it less or more or whatever. Um, but a deeply influential text or book. And the series were different titles, thin volumes of, I don't know if they were talks of his or things that he actually wrote while he was alive. But one of the titles of the book was How to Be Happy All the Time. And I thought, well, that's kind of stupid. And I don't want to be disparaging about the author because I'm sure that the title of that book is at least a little bit oversimplistic. It's probably more along the lines of how to stay mindful and maintain your emotional equilibrium in the face of life's challenges, which that title would not be as catchy. So how to be happy all the time is what they went with. But I thought that's silly. I don't want to be happy all the time. That would be miserable. Ironically, it would be miserable to be happy all the time because if we were happy all the time, we wouldn't see it as being happy. That would just be our normal state. And then we would take that for granted in much the same way that we often take our usual state of homeostasis for granted. Feeling fine is something that we rarely pay attention to. Um, I spoke of last week, I spoke of the concept of diversifying your emotional portfolio in order to insulate yourself against volatility. Um, Mutual funds buy a little bit of many companies. That way, if one company goes down, you are not hit as hard. You have balanced out due to the diversification of different investments. And emotions are the same way. The more we diversify ourselves with the experience of emotions and the experience of experiencing the emotion, which is to say, how we interpret the emotion can be the first arrow, to quote an analogy of the Buddha. The first arrow is an emotion. It's the chemicals in your brain. We can't really stop that. The second arrow is one that doesn't have to come unless you make yourself miserable about experiencing the emotion or not. As Shakespeare said in Hamlet, there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And otherwise, we can experience a familiar emotion, but the way that we choose to interpret it in many ways determines the experience that we have, or perhaps in every way, it determines the experience that we have. And so if you were to want to be happy all the time, which is a pretty naive and unrealistic expectation, although I feel like it's a very common goal for people, and that happiness tends to be so abstract and so vague and so unclear that they'll never really get it. There's a saying that the reason most people don't get what they want is because they don't know what they want. And if you were to want to be happy all the time, that would be the equivalent of putting all of your money into one stock. And then when the stock goes up, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm rocking. This stock is so high. And when the stock goes down, as is inevitable, what goes up must come down, you might find yourself being devastated because you've put everything into that one stock, that one emotion. Where if we sit down to meditate, we are investing in the diversification of our experience. We are looking at the diverse experience, moment by moment, breath by breath, that comes with meditation. And we notice what we're thinking, what we're feeling. We can point it out. We can look at it. We can, I want to say label, but that often has a negative connotation. So I'll say labeling without a negative connotation. What we can do is something that the Buddha said. He used an analogy of a farmer cutting open a sack of mixed grains. And the farmer can point out, okay, that's rice, that is, beans, that is wheat, and you're going through and you're picking out and noticing, identifying, right? You're identifying parts of your experience. And when we meditate, we think, oh, okay, this is anger. I'm experiencing anger right now. That's okay. And I can experience it more metaphysically, or I can experience it more somatically, which is to say, how does this emotion interpret itself into my body? And we sit with that. And then when the emotion passes, as meditation teaches us will happen, the diversification increases. And suddenly there aren't really good or bad emotions. There's just, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And the beauty of the neutral experiences that we so often have is they can be tipped either way, pleasant or unpleasant. For instance, if we're feeling okay, not in any kind of pain, not in any kind of emotional or psychological turmoil or tension or stress, oftentimes we don't notice that. We only notice when the stock, so to speak, is really high or really low. However, most of our life, we are walking this sort of middle ground of homeostasis where everything is working, everything is fine. And because it's fine, neutral, as it were, we don't notice it. If it were pleasant or unpleasant, our attention would focus more on that. But the practice of meditation is redirecting our attention to whatever's happening in the present moment. And so often, what's happening in the present moment is not much. Things are pretty good. Things are pretty stable. Not always, not going to be happy all the time, but to appreciate the luxury of feeling fine. When I would teach a yin class at one of the yoga studios, I would do a body scan, and everyone would lie down in savasana, or the final resting pose, on your back, and I would do a um, pretty thorough body scan, although they can go up to an hour. I do about 15 or 20 minutes, but we'd start at the feet and work our way up to the crown of the head. And whenever I would get to the torso section of the body, I'd say, this is an interesting part of the meditation because we have all of the internal organs here. We have the stomach, the spleen, the kidneys, the liver, you have your lungs. I said, all of these things are working at optimum capacity without any effort on your part. And they are working interdependently. And we have no say in that. If your kidneys start to fail, you will notice it. When your kidneys are working, you usually don't. I had a couple of girl friends. They didn't know each other, but coincidentally or otherwise, both of them were diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Thyroid is in your throat. It's a part of your throat that's actually shaped like a butterfly, which a lot of people don't know. I didn't. Uh, Thyroid cancer is relative to other types of cancers, very manageable. And they underwent again, relatively painless surgery, and the process, they're in remission now, and it's not a problem for them. But they didn't really think about their thyroids until the doctor said, uh-oh, something wrong with your thyroid. And you're thinking, what's a thyroid? Where is that? What is that? Where if we cut open the grain sack, or the sack of different grains, you could think, oh yeah, there's my thyroid in my throat. There's the organs working in the body. Just the awareness there. And I mean, that's why the breath is such an invaluable or essential tool of mindfulness, because it's always there as long as we're living. The breath is always there. If it's not, something's wrong. You got to make some phone calls quickly. The breath is um, constantly there. And because it's constantly there, much like the um, optimum homeostasis that we so often um, are experiencing but not aware of, the um, breath is our best friend, our greatest ally. If it wasn't there, we would notice right away. And because it's always there, we so often lose our conscious connection with it. But because it's always there, again, we can tip the scales in either way. Because the breath is always there, as long as we're alive, we can appreciate it or we can take it for granted. And of course, we need both because we can't appreciate something necessarily without at least recognizing, if not experiencing, recognizing what it would be like to lack that particular um, uh, part of our experience. So the reason why anything has value in this life is because it's impermanent. And the breath is very impermanent in the sense that it comes and it goes. You can't retake your last breath. You can't pre-take your next breath. You can't keep the breath that you have right now. Breathing is a verb, it's an action. Breath is a noun, yes. Um, but to be able to sit and identify how you're feeling, and there's so many different ways to do that. The establishments of mindfulness, the four establishments, body, feelings, which is kind of a sort of a blend of, not sort of, it's a blend between psychological and physical experience. I've said before that an emotion is a thought that you feel. And again, that may be overly simplistic, but it's worth remembering that oftentimes our emotional state is tied directly to our psychological state. Everything is connected. That's the power of the body scan as well. We think of the organs in the stomach, the heart, the, all of the layout in the human body. It's immense and it is incredibly um, complex, but it all works in conjunction or in synchronicity with itself. And so much of that is out of our control. What is in our control is where we direct our focus, where we direct our attention. And if we continue to stay mindful with our current experience, moment by moment, breath by breath, the diversification of our emotional portfolio will help insulate us from volatility. Volatility is still there. We're not trying to annihilate or eliminate the volatility. We cannot be happy all of the time. If you want to try, good for you. Let me know how it goes. But the volatility is there. We're not trying to do away with the volatility. We are insulating ourselves through a deeper perspective of the diversification of our emotions. And then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, this emotion isn't particularly pleasant, but it's not bad. Bad is so black and white, right? Or we think, oh, I'm just breathing right now. And actually, now that I notice that, breathing, which was a kind of neutral state, is a pretty pleasant activity now. If your breath were to leave you, you would take that personally. You would notice right away. And because it's always there, as long as you're alive, we have the opportunity to check in, to look at that, to experience that, to breathe mindfully. And, autopilot isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's very practical. It's necessary. You can't take every single breath consciously. The unconscious mechanism of the breath is obviously what keeps us alive. It allows us to operate on our day-to-day basis. But again, because it is always there, we have that option. We have that opportunity to connect with it. And so whether it's the breath or your physical experience or your emotional experience, kind of a physiological landscape, or if it's more cognitive or cerebral, which is to say, more mental, there's endless angles through which to examine the grains in the sack or our emotional uh, portfolio. Um, and that's the power. We're not trying to be happy all the time. I wouldn't want to be happy all the time because I would have no frame of reference with which to gauge that happiness. Because I've been miserable, I've suffered in my past in various ways and at various depths. Because of that, I'm able to appreciate the life that I have now. And that is the payoff, that's the benefit. How in Buddhism, true mind and deluded mind are not two separate entities. They coexist. One is the other. One cannot exist without the other. And suffering and happiness are made of the same substance. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, suffering and happiness are made of the same substance. And when we start to look at our experience that way, where everything is necessary, every emotion is necessary. Every emotion is necessary for the diversification of our experience, thereby insulating us from high volatility. When we start to think of everything as necessary, then our mind changes. And oftentimes, the only thing that we need to change in our life is our perspective, the way that we see things, the way that we understand things. If we change that, I mean, everything else changes. Lao Tzu said, change your mind and everything will fall into place, translated from Chinese. So these are all things to think about. This is what we do every time we sit down to meditate. And we condition ourselves to be able to deal with the volatility that is inevitable. And we don't need to change it. We just know that, oh, yeah, that's part of the portfolio, if we wish to use that analogy. And sometimes I will just say, as an aside, before we get into the formal meditation practice, as an aside, if you find yourself dealing with thoughts that are of a more biochemical disposition, which is to say depression or severe anxiety or suicidal tendencies on the extreme end of the spectrum, those thoughts should be taken care of, not ignored, nor pushed away, but the steps that we take to deal with certain thoughts like that, certain darker, more challenging thoughts, they may require more than just medication, therapy, etc. There's a lot of different resources out there. Call somebody that you love and talk it out, journal it out. There's different ways to deal with our thoughts. And I would never say that meditation is the answer to everything, but I will say that meditation is a huge part of the answer to everything. Meditation is a huge part of the answer to everything. The more you know yourself, the deeper self-understanding you have, the more fluidly and easily you will navigate through the world around you, which is really just a reflection of the world inside of you. So all of this stuff is really, in many ways, the embodiment of the practice of meditation. It's one angle that we can look at it as, but also the one sec. But one of many ways to look at it. So find a comfortable seated position as you are. A little less than 10 minutes right now. Close your eyes, breathe, relax. Take a few deep breaths on your own. Whenever you're ready, gently blink your eyes open. Meditation doesn't change our emotions. Meditation changes how we deal with our emotions, how we handle our emotions, how we think about our emotions. If we can sit with boredom, if we can sit with seemingly neutral experiences and feelings, that gives us a foundation to experience a little more volatility under certain circumstances. We're not trying to be happy all the time. That would be boring. The diversification of our emotional portfolio is one that will help us over time. It changes our understanding of emotions. And with that paradigm shift that comes from practice, or shift in perspective, um, everything changes. Our world becomes better inside and out. I want to thank you as always for sharing your practice with me. My name is Casey. Enjoy the week. See you soon.